Alleluia, 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 alleluia. If today you hear his voice, harden not your heart. Alleluia, alleluia, alleluia. The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. Jesus again in reply spoke to the chief priests and the elders of the people in parables, saying, "The kingdom of heaven may be likened to a king who gave a wedding feast for his son. He dispatched his servants to summon the invited guests to the feast, but they refused to come. A second time he sent other servants, saying, 'Tell those invited, behold, I have prepared my banquet. My calves and fattened cattle are killed, and everything is ready. Come to the feast.' Some ignored the invitation and went away, one to his farm, another to his business. The rest laid hold of his servants, mistreated them, and killed them. The king was enraged and sent his troops, destroyed those murderers, and burned their city. Then the king said to his servants, 'The feast is ready, but those who were invited were not worthy to come. Go out therefore into the main roads and invite to the feast whomever you find.' The servants went out into the streets and gathered all they found, bad and good alike. The hall was filled with guests. But when the king came in to meet the guests, he saw a man there not dressed in a wedding garment. He said to him, 'My friend, how is it that you came in here without a wedding garment?' But he was reduced to silence. Then the king said to his attendants, 'Bind his hands and feet, and cast him into the darkness outside, where there will be wailing and grinding of teeth. Many are invited, but few are chosen.'" The Gospel of the Lord. Today we are finishing up our reading of the book of Judges, and in the next few weeks we'll be getting into the letters of St. Paul. Today's reading is a very confusing reading about the story of Jephthah, one of the many judges recounted in the book of Judges, who rises up as a sort of military hero, releasing the Israelites from bondage. And one of the most famous aspects of this story with Jephthah is that after he was victorious, or rather before he went into battle, he made a vow to God. And he made a vow to God that if God granted him victory in battle, then the first person he would see after his victory, he would offer up as a sacrifice to the Lord. Which immediately should get yourself wondering what is going on there. God doesn't desire human sacrifice, so why would Jephthah do this? And Jephthah was victorious in battle, and so after the battle was over, the first person he saw coming to him was actually his daughter. And so Jephthah rent his garments and bewailed the fact that now he was under obligation to offer up his daughter and sacrifice, as a human sacrifice, a burnt offering to God. And so he did. This is one of the most perplexing stories of all of the Bible. It's important for us to remember a couple of things about it. First of all, just because something is done in the Old Testament doesn't mean that God is condoning it. Right? There are many things that happen in the Old Testament that God does not condone and actually often condemns in implicit ways. So it's possible that this is what is going on with Jephthah. A second thing to keep in mind about this story is kind of a secret. You guys this morning are fortunate enough to be one of the few people in the world who is going to know what I believe is the true interpretation of this passage. Right? And it is kind of a secret. Even many modern scholars and even Catholic scholars miss some very important details about this text. First of all, whenever Jephthah is mentioned anywhere else in the scriptures, there's never any condemnation of any of his actions. And you would think this would be first and foremost one of the things that would get brought up in the Psalms or in the New Testament, people reflecting on Jephthah. It never comes up. Why is that? Presumably because he didn't really do anything wrong. And there's actually some clues about that in the text. There's some clues in the text that he did not actually offer up his daughter as a human sacrifice. And there's some clues that can indicate that. First of all, if he were to have offered up his daughter in sacrifice, we wouldn't have any idea where that would take place. That certainly would not have happened in the tabernacle. Right? Also, after he tells his daughter about his vow, his daughter goes away for 2 months, and rather than mourning her life, she mourns her virginity with her companions. If you were just told that your life was going to be offered to God in sacrifice in 2 months, I imagine you'd be mourning your life, not just your virginity. Right? Another clue from the text. We didn't have this in the reading this morning, but verse 40, directly following this text, it says that the daughters of Israel used to go and mourn over the daughter of Japheth 4 times a year. And that's one of the things that people normally point to, and they say, see, it's clear enough right here. They used to go and mourn the fact that her life was ended. But that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. There's no other traditions in Jewish history of people going to mourn somebody's death multiple times a year. And it just so happens that that word for mourning is actually only used one other time in the entire Old Testament. And it's not translated as mourning, but rather as celebrating. Another way you could render it is saying conversing with. So in other words, the verse is saying that after this, 4 times a year, the daughters of Israel, aka her friends, would visit her 4 times a year and converse and celebrate with her about the great victory God had accomplished and how her consecration was a response to that victory. It is not uncommon in the Old Testament for people to literally be offered up as a burnt offering, as in they consecrated themselves entirely to God. This happens just a little bit later in salvation history. In the book of Samuel, for example, Hannah, this woman who was barren, unable to have a child, remember, she made a deal with God. And she said that if God gave her a son, she would offer him to the Lord. And that's what ended up happening. Her son's name was Samuel, and he was raised in the tabernacle, being of service to the priests. So presumably, that is actually what happened with this young woman as well, the only daughter of Japheth. He was so unhappy and was mourning because she was his only child. So he was no longer going to have any descendants, no grandchildren. All of his plans that he had had for her were now going to be offered up to God's plans for her. When we see the story in that light, first of all, it's just amazing. It's cool that when we really study the Scriptures, we can discover all these things. But it is also a good practical reminder to us. When God grants us great victories, when God accomplishes great things from us in our life, usually that means that we're also going to have to offer a lot back to Him. For me, when I was in high school, it was my dreams of going to college and having a family and a wife. For some people, it's their children having vocations to the priesthood and religious life. Oftentimes, when somebody has a religious vocation, the most difficult hurdle they have to overcome is convincing their parents that it's okay. I've heard stories of men wanting to enter the seminary, and literally their parents will threaten to leave the church if they do so. But those are some of the major ways. Sometimes it's other ways. We have to sacrifice our resentments towards people that we've had in the past. Or maybe we have to give up the goal of having a new marriage after a spouse passes away or after we go through a divorce. Sometimes it's the embracing of a simpler lifestyle, the sacrifice of a more well-paying job, or some other such thing. regardless, when God does great things for us, that also means that we're going to have to sacrifice a lot for Him. And it's difficult at first to embrace it. But we should have the generosity, the gratitude of Japheth and of his daughter to give all things to God, no matter what the cost.